How does student loans work for graduate school? Here's an example. The first debt that you always take out for graduate school is something called a Stafford loan. Now, for grad school, you don't have Stafford subsidized anymore, you only have Stafford unsubsidized. This means that the interest rate is 6.08%, 6.08. And then on top of that, you have a origination fee that's about 1%. This means that you lose about 1% of what you borrow to paying this upfront fee, and then you also have to pay this approximate 6% interest rate on top of that every year you have the debt, right? So if you think about that, that's a very limited amount that you can take out for a lot of graduate programs. Unless you are in a specified medical professional program that has higher limits, the limit yearly for Stafford loan borrowing is $20,500 per year. The total limit is about $138,500. So if you were at a MBA program like Wharton that costs $80,000 a year, you're limited to only a little over $20,000 in Stafford loans with this 6% interest rate and 1% origination fee. Now, if you decide to do a program like where are you going to get the rest of that debt if you can only borrow $20,000 of Stafford? The next portion of debt comes from something called the Grad Plus program if you're borrowing from the federal government. The Grad Plus loan has an interest rate of 7.08% with an origination fee of 4.24% approximately. So that is a much more costly loan. The benefit of using it is you have access to income-driven repayment programs. The downside, of course, is it's very, very expensive. For certain medical professions like obviously human medicine, dentistry, and some others, you actually get a higher yearly Stafford loan limit of $40,500 a year up to an aggregate maximum of $224,000 for all of your Stafford borrowing. So what that tells you is that you will get to borrow it at a cheaper rate up to that $40,000 level, and then you will switch over to Grad Plus. So does it make sense to take these federal loans? Let's say that you work in you're taking out loans for a professional program and you've hit your Stafford loan limit already and you're wondering, do I take out the Grad Plus loan or do I go with this cheaper private option? And the thing that you really need to be aware of is when you have all federal loans, you have one payment that's 10% of your income max. When you take extra private loans, you create two payments. One that's 10% of your income and one is whatever the private loans are that you borrowed. If your plan is to refinance the whole thing at graduation, then that's not that big of a deal. But if you are not wanting to refinance that whole thing at graduation, then you're making a mistake because you're creating an extra payment for no reason or for a limited reason of limited utility of having a lower total interest cost, which might not be as important as having a low required payment as a new grad. So if you do want to take out mostly all private loans because you're getting a better deal than with the federal government, you could do that as well. You just want to make sure that your debt to income ratio is below 1.5 to 1 and that you'd be able to make this payment of, think of it being 1% of the total amount that you'll have to pay monthly. Can you afford that, with your expected income? If you can, then you might inquire about private loans. We actually have private loans. You could check out studentloanplanner.com/private and you'll be able to see the different private loan options that you could apply for. The simple truth is most people will be better served for graduate school programs by taking out only federal debt. There are some exceptions to that, like people who know they're going to have a really high income and are going to come out with a modest amount of debt, and those people could consider private loans. But be careful because when you go visit that financial aid office, they will give you anything that you ask for because there are no caps on borrowing. If you have questions, if you want a one-on-one plan, we can help, studentloanplanner.com/help, and then you can obviously comment in this section here in the YouTube comments below. Thanks so much.